Hello everyone, this is Prana Subba, Assistant Professor in the Department of History, Salesian College, Sonada, tuning into Radio Salesian EduPod's lecture series. This is the third lecture for the fourth semester's honours paper CC10. We were discussing the fifth unit patterns of regional politics and the topic was Mughal decline. In the last class, we were discussing the three-tier jamindari structure and the peasants who were under them. Now, how these structure caused a problem was these jamindars were very much strong. They were having local ties with peasants, and that was very important source of power for these jamindars. They controlled small armies and even forts also. Mughal administration could not function without their cooperation. Akbar tried to gain their loyalty, but Aurangzeb he failed. The jamindars turned against the Mughal state at that time. During the time of Bahadur Shah, the jamindars, both the primary and the intermediaries, they were with the active support of this hard-pressed peasants, turned against the state. So the connection between the jamindars and the peasants and the local ties, ultimately that tie was so strong that they went against the state when there was crisis, and that they were very much hard to control by the Mughal state. Now, why these jamindars turned against the state was there was increasing oppression upon jagirdars as also. Like they were frequently transferred. Irfan Habib says that jagirdars took full advantage of their short tenure within the land, and then they exploited the peasants to the most. There was no attachment or long-term interest. So these jagirdars tried to exploit as much as possible from one land where they were transferred to. And then there was no proper supervision also, because supervision completely collapsed in the 18th century. When the local conditions were too turbulent to collect revenue, they would farm out the collection right to the highest bidder, that is the Ijaradari system. Collection was higher than the state's actual demand. Ultimately, pressure was upon the primary jamindars and the peasants. During Farrukh Shiar's reign, even Khalisa land was given over the Ijaradars. Now, what was the thing was, because they were transferred frequently, now what they would do was, within their short tenure, they would try to extract as much as possible from the peasants, giving a tremendous pressure upon the peasants. And then, when it was very hard for them to collect the revenue, they would farm out the land and give it to the highest bidder. And that system was known as Ijaradari system. And these Ijaradars, on the other hand, they would again exploit the peasant to the fullest. And under this pressure, it was the primary jamindars and the peasants who would revolt against the state. And during the time of Farrukh Shah, it is said that Khalisa land were also given out to Ijaradars. We already know what is Khalisa land, and now we also know what Ijaradars were. Now, there were some mighty jamindars who could defy this transfer, and because they had developed local ties and they were very much strong. Now, what they did was they had power bases, and through these power bases, they were also extracting as much as possible from the peasants. The peasants were defying state for their own share of surplus. Jamindars were defying control, defying the central authority. They were not paying revenue, or even when they were forcibly collected. Because of their community ties, they could easily mobilize the peasants against the state. So this kind of problem was happening. Peasants were revolting for their surplus. Jamindars were revolting because they did not want it to get transferred, or they were exploiting their own right. Therefore, the Marathas, Sardars, the Jat peasants, the Sikh, the Rajput chief, they revolted to carve out autonomous state for themselves. Like these principalities, within these principalities, the local jamindars and the local rulers, what they did was, now they revolted against the weak rulers, and they tried to carve out their own autonomous state, for which they were pretty much successful as well. By the end of the 18th century, what happened was, Mughal Empire or the emperor was confined only to the narrow stretch around the capital of Delhi. In the year 1851, when Bahadur Shah, the last Mughal, was there, English ended only the fiction of his imperium. Like, there was no such thing to be taken away from the Mughals. It was just the title. This was the conventional view, which was where we discussed several factors. But then we have also the revisionist historians who say that poverty and economic pressure they are not adequate explanation for the rebellion or ultimate decline of the Mughals, because there was regional variation in local economies. Therefore, looking from the perspective of periphery, if we look differently, decline was because of the rise of the new economic and political powers and the inability of the center to control them, because there was regional prosperity, and the history of Mughal was that of prosperity and growth rather than that of the crisis. Now, what these revisionist historians are saying is that the decline was not because of the poverty and the crisis, but they were because of the rise of new economic and political powers. Like they say that the history of Mughal were not that of the poverty and crisis, but that of rise and prosperity and growth. Example, Moradabad, Bareilly, Awadh, Banaras, Bengal, they were the prosperous regions. Like they are the new forest settlers in the eastern Bengal. They gave distinct regional and political orientation to their own agrarian communities. Like the new settlers in this eastern Bengal, the new forest settlers, that they were giving distinct identities to themselves. Therefore, it was easier for the provincial rulers also to carve out their own space, their own autonomous state. There was rising production, there was monetization, which gave the courage to challenge the state. Now, they were producing, they were having money, now they could challenge the state to assert their autonomy while still continuing the cultural and ideological framework of the Mughal state. They were very much under the Mughal state, but then now they tried their fullest to gain the independence while still continuing the Mughal system of administration, the Mughal ideologies and everything. Now, the power was being diffused into these corporate groups and the new social class. C.A. Bailey terms this as portfolio capital of these new corporate groups and the social classes, which could be invested to reap huge profits. Mughal period was a history of compromise of these powers, is what C.A. Bailey says. Andre Wink also says that Mughal sovereignty rested on the balancing system of continually shifting rivalries and alliances. While it was always ready for rebellion, it also tried to incorporate these powers into its concept of universal dominion through harmony or force. But enough space was left for rebellion. Frank Perlin says that there was various categories and techniques of collecting revenue, system of governance, methods of measurement varying widely in space and time. There were multiplicity of rights also, like for example, the concept of Watan in Deccan was heritable land which could not be taken away by king also. So the attempts of centralization was least effective. Now what these points are trying to say is that the power was now being diffused into these groups, and now they were no longer ready to be under the state, under the centralized Mughal state. Now they were gaining their own power and they were trying to have their own space, own rights. While Mughals were trying to incorporate them into this concept of universal dominion through harmony or with force, but they were not being able to. Muzaffar Alam also says that because of this decentralization, now this centralizing attitude or this concept of Mughal was declining. So now everyone was now gaining their own power. So decentralization and commercializing the growth of the money, a group of upstart. Now these group of upstarts were those jagirdars who defied transfers, revenue farmers, new entrepreneurs of revenue, combined with military force. Now what they did was they monopolized the local resources and successfully contested the centralizing tendency of the Mughal state. Therefore, it was not the crisis and the poverty, but the growth and prosperity that provided the context of the local political turmoil. These new developments could have been properly reorganized or accommodated, but failed to do so. So these developments could have solved the problem. They could have thought about the empire and they could have given a new leadership. But then they were all selfish intentioned, and then that finally led to the crisis. So this is another concept of the revisionist historians who say that it was not only the poverty and the crisis, but it was the prosperity and the growth that also led towards the decline. It was like a big huge tree was dying, and out of that the smaller other trees were growing out of the same tree. Now in conclusion, we can say that it is not completely possible for us to either deny the conventional factors for the reason of the decline of the Mughals, neither it is fully the revisionist historians can be denied. While revisionist historians have underestimated the coerciveness or ignored the contemporary Mughal concept of centralizing sovereignty, on the other hand, we see the conventionalists have been criticized of having a mindset of looking Mughal state only as a centralized structure. And the author only says that on the shared ground, it is a common recognition that zamindars or the intermediary classes, it constituted a centrifugal force in the Mughal system. So they had their own weaknesses. Some underestimated the Mughal centralized theory. On the other hand, some overlooked it. But Arthur early says that, okay, whatever the fact may be, we cannot ignore that Jamindars constituted a major class of the Mughal system. So when these Jamindari system fell weak, that finally led towards the decline of the Mughals. Therefore, the idea of decline is inadequate to understand the 18th century India. So when we say 18th century India, we all have a thought like it was a dark age, it was a period of decline. But then Mughal system continued in regional powers, though there was decline of the Mughal, but then there were coming of the regional state who followed the same kind of system which Mughals had. So Mughal system continued into these regional powers. We cannot term this period as a dark age or an age of decline, but then there was a decline of one pan-Indian empire, which was followed by a variety of regional powers. Satish Chandra rightly says that this century should therefore be considered as a distinct chronological whole. So now that we have discussed the conventional view and the revisionist view, I am sure you are quite clear with the idea of the decline of the Mughals. But we also have to keep in mind that the ultimate demise of the empire was only after the revolt of 1857 in the year 1858 with the Queen's proclamation, when Bahadur, the last of the Mughal Bahadur Shah Jafar, was sent to exile into Burma. Until then, they were just the rulers for the namesake only. The decline had already started after the death or during the lifetime of the Aurangzeb. The glorious era of the Mughals had ultimately passed not into the hand of the regional powers but those of the British, inaugurating the British era in the history of India. Thank you so much for listening patiently.